So what is block care?
Blocked care is a state. For me, this is my definition. The official definition by the neuroscientists who came up with it, I do not have to give you. But my definition is a state that a carer, in my case, a parent, gets into where they aren't able to find the compassion or empathy for their children that is required to parent. They aren't able to access joy. They feel resentment and very lonely and isolated. And you're not able to see the reasons behind the kid's behavior. All you can feel is the impact that it's having on you and the resentment for feeling like your child has made you into this kind of parent that you never wanted to be. That's my experience with blocked care. It feels absolutely terrible and like all the things you'd never want to say out loud to another person.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Just not being able to have feelings of love for your child. I mean, I remember saying things like, well, I know I love them, but I can't feel it anymore.
Exactly.
And I don't know even know if I ever, then I started saying things like, I don't even know if I ever felt it. And I don't know if I'll ever get to feel it. And that's scary to me. And I was so blocked. I was so scared about everybody's future at that time. And I wish someone had said that to me. Hey, this happens. And there's a way out. But I did want to also say that I did blame my children for making me feel this way. And I know better. I know that my feelings are my own and that nobody makes me feel anything. And I did blame them for how I was feeling. And that was really hard because, you know, when you blame somebody for something, you think they're the problem.
I have a funny story about that, but also the resentment I would feel when someone would be like, "Oh, poor him." You know, they'd say my child's name. I feel so bad for him. And inside I would just feel rage. I would be like, "How can you feel bad for him? Look what he's done to my life." At one point, my child was about 3 years old probably, and I was convinced because of this is how bad it got. I was convinced that he was some sort of tiny mastermind, some kind of baby genius that was masterminding exactly the path to make me feel insane, right? I was convinced like he's doing this on purpose. And at one point I turned to my husband and I was like, I swear he knows what he's doing. And my husband looks at me and says, you think that our 3-year-old child has calculated all this out to drive you crazy? And I was like, I really do. Because it just felt like his responses were the exact thing that would make me the most upset at each moment. And of course, over time, I learned that was because of my own pain and vulnerabilities and trauma and fears and letdown and all those things. But in that moment, I was convinced and I needed someone to look at me sideways and say, like, ma'am, you need to really think about what's going on in your head right now.
Right. I have another experience that's similar, only on a completely different wavelength. I don't remember really how old my kids were now, probably 10 to 12. I was having these thoughts on my way home from work, these really kind of secret thoughts that I didn't think were secret because I wasn't really listening. I knew they were there. And I was thinking of, is this bridge high enough to drive off of? And then I started thinking about if it is high enough and I drive off of it, then what's going to happen to my kids? First, I was like, oh, somebody will take them. And then I was like, no, nobody will. And so then I was like, okay, I got to take them with me. So I got to figure out when to take them and where to take them. And then we're all going to go together. And I'm like, oh my God. I went home and I told my partner at the time, well, actually he's still my partner, just so you know. I said, so I've been thinking about driving off of a bridge with the kids. Now I'm thinking I maybe should include you. he's like, I think you need to see someone. And actually, up until that moment, I hadn't really thought this was too weird. I thought anybody in my situation would be thinking this way. And then when he said it, I'm like, oh yeah, I need help.
Yeah, it's the moment when you say the crazy thing out loud and you see the look on someone else's face, you're like, wait, I need to check myself. I had the similar fantasies about getting really sick and being in the hospital so that someone would have to step in. That was like the only way I could think of getting a break. So I was like, maybe if I crashed, but like not too bad, they would have to put me in the hospital. But it
Uh,
shows the desperation and the isolation and the
oh yeah,
disconnection from reality. You sort of just downward spiral, and it just keeps
right.
getting worse and worse.
Absolutely. And we can only laugh about it now. It's sort of gallows humor, but we can only laugh about it now because we're out of it. We
Oh
found our
yeah,
way. We found our way out of it. And that's why we're talking about it to all of you out there who are listening, because there is a way out. There absolutely is. It's just that if no one talks about it and no one tells you about it, how can you possibly know there's a map? There's a road, there's a path to follow.
right. For me, just hearing someone say it out loud made me feel like a real person with an actual identifiable problem and not just a terrible human being. Um, and a defective person, which is how I felt, like not
Yeah.
qualified to parent any children. And then the first step for me, the first tiny glimmer of light from a million miles in the distance was just finding another person that had any idea what I was talking about. And I was lucky to eventually find another adoptive mom who was able to say the hard things out loud, which I think is what's so incredible about your group, putting these people who can say the hard things out loud all together in one place. It was so hard to find. I tried starting groups with other adoptive parents, but when I would start to say these things, I would see them just sort of look away or kind of shut down and pull back. And I understand that. I 100% understand the need to protect yourself, and you don't know who's safe and who's not to say those things to.
Mm-hmm.
But every time they didn't acknowledge it or they said it wasn't their experience, I felt more and more and more alone. And luckily, I kept trying because, it's scary to think about what would have happened if I hadn't, how isolated I would have gotten.
It is scary to think about. Me too, because I really wasn't realizing how serious it had become until I said it out loud. And when parents come into Love Matters, they often are afraid. They ask me, well, if I say how I feel out loud, are you going to report me?
Mm-hmm.
Are people going to shun me? Am I going to be judged? I'm like, oh, no, we're going to love you. We're going to love you until you feel better because that's what you need. And these are thoughts. You're not actually abusing your child regularly. And if you are, you need help. And so if you need help, then you can ask me for it. But it's not my job to run around trying to get people in trouble. So this is a safe place. And that's hard because as a therapist, there are laws and there are rules. And so I'm not in there as a therapist, I'm in there as a coach because I want
Right.
to be able to keep coaching, keep supporting people because I know they'll get to the other side.
That is so important, I feel, to be the safe place for them to try these feelings, try sharing the feelings out loud.
Mhm.
That's a great thing about being a parent partner. I'm not a therapist. I'm still a mandated reporter. And if there, of course, there is any abuse, I would need to say something. But as a person who knows exactly what it feels like, I deeply understand what they're saying when they talk about their feelings. And I also, because I've come through it, know they can do it. The potential is there. Separating out the impact of living in a constant state of stress and in the presence of a child that's in a protective state, what feels like 24 hours a day, and the impact that has on your nervous system, separating that from who you are without having anyone to talk to is almost impossible.
Yeah.
I couldn't, I don't think, have done it on my own. And I was reading the books and it was
Mhm.
brand new information, but um, I was reading the books. I was looking desperately for those parents who could say it out loud. I was trying to pretend my way to the parent I wanted to be. But until I could say these things out loud and get connection and empathy from someone else, my nervous system, I'd never felt safe. I never felt like I could set anything down. I was just in a reactive state. I was the raw nerve,
Yeah.
just like my child, all the time.
Right. It was hard to tell for me too. Like, wait, is it me? Am I the one? Because I was trying to find somebody to blame. First, I blamed them, and then I thought, well, that's not right. They're children. Then I blame myself, but I couldn't tell who was the more traumatized, me or them. It was just a kind of crazy loop I was in, trying to figure it out until I realized, oh, it's us. It's us
Yep.
together.
I remember saying to my husband at one point, I had every month, I would have PMS for a few days. And I remember saying to him, this is when I started kind of to figure it out. I was like, it's like he knows when it's coming and he just gets worse. And he said, or you start acting differently and it impacts him. And I was like,
Ding,
oh,
ding, 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 ding.
ding, ding. That was the beginning of me realizing that I was gonna have to go first in this game of chicken of who's gonna get their act together. It wasn't gonna be my 3-year-old or my 5-year-old or my 7-year-old. In the game of chicken for who's gonna get it together, I was gonna have to go first because
Right.
he, of course, had no ability to self regulate. It had to be me to provide that to him. Then I realized that, and the resentment came. I have to keep super vulnerably putting myself out there with no guarantee that he's not going to hurt me. And that's the only path forward. I resented him deeply for that. Of course, intellectually, I understood it's not his fault, but
Yeah. So that is one of the harder things that I experience parents to grapple with is because as a therapist, a lot of parents come to me and they're like, fix them, fix her, he's broken, fix her. And, I would always, after I learned and I educated myself and I did my trauma work, I was able to say, yeah, it's not going to start there. It can't. It's impossible. It has to start with you. You're the answer. You're the most important person in the room, always, and you always will be. And that is a heavy burden, right? Resentment can come from that, but also just this sense of, oh my gosh, it's on me to figure this out. And it's not solely on you, but your regulation is solely on you to figure out. And you might need help to do it, but your regulation is important to your children's regulation. And without you regulated, they're not going to be that. They can't get there.
right. Yeah. And so many of us don't learn these tools. And a lot of us can get through parenting a kid that's neurotypical without having to really strengthen all of these muscles. Our first child, he is not neurotypical, but the way that he expresses his struggles is just more compatible with my skill set. And my younger child, not at all. So with the skills I had when he was young. And now that I've built all of these skills and my muscles around self-regulation, self-awareness, having that regulated nervous system, being aware of when I'm getting close to the edge of my window of tolerance, all of these things I never learned until I was in my 30s. I see, of course, these are just life skills that
Right.
we get kind of put through this intensive boot camp to develop because it's a daily practice with our kids. But at the time, not knowing that, it felt like I had to be some kind of super parent. I had to do things that no one else had to do, which we do in some ways. That is true. But these skills are universal skills that help me in every area of my life and let me show up for other parents now. That is why I can do it because I developed all these skills.
It's also like showing up for yourself first, right? You have to show up for yourself first. Then you show up for your kids. And then you show up for other people. It's self care. You have to take care of yourself and show up and see yourself and what's happening inside of you and take responsibility. And, whoa, that's hard, but it's so freeing in a way because I can work on me. I can't really work on my kids, you know? So you have a lot of power when you realize that you are the most important person in the room. And that means then you have a lot of power, right? Because you have the means and the ability to change yourself.